to Maidens Smiles. Just got back to my apartment here in Colorado. In June, I decided to fly back to Hawaii to visit my family because the ticket prices dropped from Denver to Hawaii. Me being a budget flyer, I just booked the flight and went, and I was only supposed to stay for like 3 to 4 weeks, but I ended up staying for about 3 months instead of 3 weeks. I was really homesick, and when I'm really homesick, it's really hard for me to get anything done, so I just decided to go back home for a little while. So I ended up staying for the entire summer and it was wonderful. I attempted vlogging, but I ended up just deciding not to film because I was just really enjoying catching up with my family and friends. Lots of farm animals.
Good morning. There's turkeys. Good morning, guys.
Like this summer, I really fell in love with reading again. I think it was something about being back home and being with my family that I felt like I did when I was a kid, and I would just go to the library and check out a bunch of books. Surprisingly, taking a break from YouTube and book reviewing really relieved a lot of pressure I hadn't realized had built up. It was really refreshing and nice to be able to just spend time with my family and read books and not feel like I immediately have to review them, and I can kind of just like let the story and the characters sink in. I also wrote more this summer than I have ever written before. As you guys know, I've been working on a novel, which I feel like I've been saying that for like years now. But this was the first summer that I actually made significant progress in my book, and I'm so excited. And it just, I think again, kind of just taking a break and allowing myself to fully get into the story helped. I actually feel like there is a finish line now, and my goal is to get it published next year, so fingers crossed. I know I've been kind of vague about it, but I'll share more in the future. Okay, so now that we're all caught up, let's talk about some of the books that I have read, because I have read quite a few books and I have been waiting to talk about them. So the first book I read, I actually downloaded on my Kindle. I ended up having a 2-hour layover and then a 6-hour flight to Hawaii, so I had quite a bit of time to kill. I brought not one book in my carry-on. All the books I brought were under the plane. Good thing I had my good old trusty Kindle Fire with me. I ended up getting a book on Kindle Unlimited, which is like a subscription thing that Amazon does. Oh my god. So I discovered this book. I have never heard of this author before. I've never read any of her books before, and this book, I kid you not, I finished on the duration of the flight. The book I read was The Moonlight Child by Karen McQuestion. Now, I went into this book thinking it was gonna be like science fiction, but it ended up being a thriller slash suspense book. It was following this older woman. Her name is Sharon, and she lives by herself in this giant house in a pretty wealthy neighborhood. On one cold January night, she decides to go outside to watch the lunar eclipse. She's out there by herself when she notices something really strange going on in her neighbor's house. Through the kitchen window, she sees this little girl who's just by herself doing the dishes, and it's very strange. One, because the little girl, it's like 11 o'clock at night, so it's really weird that there's like this little 5-year-old kid doing the dishes. Well, I don't know, my mom made me do the dishes like whenever there were dishes to be done, but I guess she finds it kind of strange that there's this girl doing dishes really late at night. Second thing that's weird is that as far as she knows, her neighbor doesn't have a daughter. Sharon tries to let it go, but she just becomes very concerned for this child. Also, her daughter's former foster daughter, Nikki, comes to stay with her, and Nikki, having come from like an abusive household and been in like the foster care system, she immediately becomes concerned for the welfare of the child. Both Sharon and Nikki decide to investigate themselves and kind of like spy on their neighbors and figure out who this girl is and just try to get more information before they actually, you know, go to the police. Oh my god, you guys, this book was so good. Like, the way the author writes it is she writes it from 3 different perspectives. So we're following Sharon and Nikki, who are the 2 characters like investigating this family. We're also following the family that's being like investigated with the little girl, and then on top of that there's a 3rd family. So we're jumping between characters within each of these 3 families, and as the story progresses you see how they're all connected, and it just kind of forms this like web of crime. Would I say it's a web of crime? I mean, that sounds pretty intense. It was pretty intense. Yeah, I'm gonna call it a web of crime, but basically you see how all these families are connected. When I got off that plane, I was just like a whole other person. Shimmy over to the right a little bit. Okay, so the next book I read, which one should we talk about? Ooh, let's talk about this book because I have some thoughts on this one. The next book I read was The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. Now, this is an adult historical fiction novel, and it takes place in the Great Plains, specifically in Texas in the year 1934. This book actually spans the years of the Great Depression, and we're following this family that is desperately trying to survive, trying to keep their farm alive as drought sweeps through the Midwest and just kills crops, animals, even the people. Their health starts to suffer just from breathing in all the dust. Many people during this time period actually fled to the West because there was promise of jobs and water and better housing, and so a lot of people were abandoning their farms and just like trying to make that trek. We're following our main character who I really didn't like the main character of this book, you guys. I think that's what, like, okay, I'm gonna give my rating at the end, but anyways, so the main character of this book, her name is Elsa, and she comes from a pretty wealthy, like, middle-class family, but her family is horrible. She was kind of like the ugly duckling of her family, and so she spent most of her years all the way until I think she's 25 when the book first starts, but she spends like majority of her life just like isolated in her room reading books. Okay, I say I don't like the main character, but we have quite a bit in common. But anyways, so she spends most of her life just like in her room. One day she ends up getting pregnant before marriage and basically gets disowned by her family. The dad just drops her off at the baby daddy's the baby daddy's house and is like, listen, she's your problem, you take care of her now. And so she kind of has to become a whole new person. She's never lived on a farm before, so take care of animals, take care of her husband, cook, clean, also raise a child. People start to leave Elsa's town. She's determined to stay. She does not want to abandon the farm because she wants to raise her children here. She wants them to grow up here. Yes, that is pretty much, I would say, like the main conflict of the first half of the story is just our main character resisting as much as possible leaving to the West because she just doesn't want to move, even though everyone in her family wants to move. And her children start to despise her because like they're dying, like the environment is killing them, but she just refuses because she just feels this need to stay and like fight for their land, even though technically the land first belonged to the indigenous people, but she wasn't ready for that conversation. I gave this book 5 out of 10 stars. It just wasn't for me, you guys. This is the second Kristen Hanna book I read, and like for me, just based off The Great Alone and how much I enjoyed that book, based off reading The Great Alone, I feel like Kristen Hanna's strength as a writer is her ability to just form this instant connection between you, the reader, and the characters. Right from chapter 1, she just makes you feel like you're a part of the family that she's writing about. Like you're sitting at the dinner table with them. You feel like you're a part of the family, and so you're hooked all the way until the end of the story. At least that's how I felt with The Great Alone, and I was really hoping to feel the same way with this book. For some reason, like that connection with the family just didn't happen for me in this book. At most, I would say I was mildly interested in like how the book ended or like how, you know, what was gonna happen with them. Unfortunately, this one just wasn't for me, though I'm still a huge Kristen Hanna fan and I do want to read some of her other novels. Okay, so the next book I read is actually by another author who wrote one of my favorite books, and Okay, I'm just gonna say this was another 5 out of 10 book for me, and I don't know why. Like, the next book I read was The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. He might sound familiar to you. Also, I feel like this cover is like pretty well known now. Alex Michaelides wrote The Silent Patient, which is one of my favorite adult thriller novels ever. It was fantastic. I feel like I've talked about it a lot, so I'll go ahead and just like let you Google the synopsis for it. I'm a little bit lazy today, but yeah, The Silent Patient was fantastic. The Maidens is Alex's newest book. It is an adult thriller suspense novel. So in the story, we're following our main character, Mariana, and she's a group therapist. She has a niece named Zoe who goes to Cambridge and is a part of this Greek tragedy class. This Greek tragedy class is taught by this very renowned professor named Edward Fosca, I believe his name was. This professor is so popular that he actually has kind of like a little fan club, this group of girls that they call themselves the maidens, always wearing white dresses and are kind of just like following him around. I did such a bad job at describing this book. Anyways, the whole situation is really weird because as a professor, you're not really supposed to have favorites, right? But he kind of has this sort of special connection with these group of girls, and it's just all real pervy. As I read the synopsis, I'm like, this dude's a perv, like for sure. Like, what professor has like a group of just female students that he like tutors? One of the girls that was a part of this group ends up being murdered, and that girl also just happens to be one of Zoe's really close friends. And so Mariana goes down to Cambridge to try and investigate what's happening and to protect her niece. As she starts investigating and learning more about this professor guy, things get really weird. Also, like I said, our main character, Mariana, she is a like licensed like group therapist, so she uses her background in psychology to also kind of figure out what's going on. Okay, so I enjoyed this book. Like, I wouldn't say I didn't enjoy it because I did finish it and it was pretty good, but I wouldn't say it was as good as The Silent Patient. I think I just had really high expectations because Alex's first book was so good. Personally, I've never been to Cambridge University, but I've read quite a few books now that take place in Cambridge, so I kind of have an idea of what it looks like, but I just remember just wishing, at least in the beginning, that he kind of fleshed out the setting a bit more. The reason I'm giving this like 5-6 stars is because I totally predicted the ending, and mind you, like, I had no clue what was gonna happen at the end of The Silent Patient, his first book, which is why I loved it so much. His first book felt like he just had you on this like carousel ride, and every time you went around, like, things looked different and you just couldn't predict what was gonna happen. I found this story was actually quite predictable, and it was quite a quick read for me. I think I finished it in like 2-3 days, but I just felt like it was really short and it didn't have as much detail. Also, I felt like the main character, or like the main focus character, who was Edward, the professor, he was kind of just like cookie cutter suspense book. And I hate saying this because I love, again, I'm a huge fan of Alex. I will continue to read his books in the future, but this one was kind of just like also a like meh. The next book I have here, I have been waiting to talk about this one because this book, you guys, this book was an absolute masterpiece. I mean, perfection. The Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boley. Now, this book is technically a young adult thriller / suspense novel, but I kind of want to categorize it as new adult because it does touch on a lot of topics that I feel like I would just categorize it as new adult. This book, we're following our main character named Donis Fontaine, and she is a biracial native teen who is pulled into an undercover FBI investigation after witnessing the tragic murder of someone really close to her. She is forced to go undercover within her community and try and hunt down this lethal drug that is believed to be at the source of the investigation. She's very much into chemistry and science, and so she uses her knowledge of traditional Ojibwe medicine as well as her background in chemistry and science to try and figure out what this lethal drug is, where it's coming from, and how to stop it and hopefully prevent more people, more teens within her community from dying. Don't even know where to start with this book. It just hit every single mark for me. Like the characters, the plot, the dialogue, the suspense, the way it was just structured, the pacing. Like, Angeline really said, like, I'm going to write a book. Like, this was a book, okay? I resonated with our main character so much in this book. Like, as a multiracial, I was gonna say as a multiracial main character, as a multiracial person, I just related to so much of what Donis experienced growing up as a biracial person, just having to kind of navigate this intersection of two different cultures and what sometimes feels like two completely different worlds. The author so perfectly illustrated what it's like to grow up biracial or multiracial and just not really fitting into the standards or expectations of either sides of your family. You sometimes don't feel entirely accepted by either community or, you know, either culture, and you know, others' expectations and perceptions about you and stereotypes about you just make it really hard to solidify your identity. I was so pleasantly surprised. Like, this, even though it's a thriller novel, it in many ways felt like a coming of age story, and that was just so wonderful to read. And on top of that, you also have this like crazy plot. These really wonderfully fleshed out characters, and our main character, she just like won my heart over in the beginning, and I just was I love Donis, and I wish he was a real person because I feel like we would be friends in real life. But okay, so the last book that I read this summer, which I feel like was the perfect summer book, not only just because of like the setting of the story, but also because it kind of had like a road trip vibe, but like a killer road trip vibe. The last book I read was Mr. Impossible by Maggie Stiefvater. This is book 2 in the Dreamers trilogy. It is a young adult. What genre would I put this in? Maggie Stiefvater is her own genre, okay? let's just leave it at that. Mr. Impossible is the second book in the Dreamers trilogy. It is a spin-off of the Raven Cycle series. First book was Call Down the Hawk. We're following one of the main characters from the Raven Cycle, who is Ronan, and he has the ability to pull objects out of his dreams. I hope that is enough to get you to read the book, but if it's not, I shall continue on. Like, Mr. Impossible is just a fever dream of a book. Like, that's the best way I can describe it. I feel like you have to kind of mentally prepare yourself before you go into one of Maggie Stiefvater's books, specifically Mr. Impossible, because her story is very much told like a riddle. Not a straightforward story, and one of the main characters, specifically in this book, he himself just speaks in riddles and metaphors, and our two characters that we're following are kind of on this journey with this new character, can literally pull things out of their dream. And so that line between what is real and not real, what is possible and impossible, is pretty much transparent. Like, for them, reality encompasses both their dreaming state and them being awake. When you can pull objects out of your dream, there's very little that separates the dreamscape from your waking state, because it's just all the same. It's all real for them. So the story quite literally feels like you're inside this lucid dream, and it's wonderful. I think Maggie Stiefvater's storytelling is so unique, and she's one of those authors where you can just give me her book without telling me it's her book, and I can tell you it's her book just based off her writing style. Let me know what your favorite book you read this summer was, as well as just like what the highlight of your summer was. If you spent it just in the house, that's okay too. Let me know what your favorite Netflix show is. Until next time, keep reading, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.